The Callaway estate sat like a monument to innovation and grief on the outskirts of Seattle, a sleek, glass-wrapped modern structure perched on a forested hillside, overlooking the endless gray of the Puget Sound. It was the kind of place the press once called the future of private luxury. But inside, there was no laughter, no music, no joy, only the soft hum of automated lights, the gentle whir of robotic vacuum units, and the occasional hush of footsteps across imported stone floors. The mansion was, in every way that mattered, silent. Ethan Callaway was not an unkind man, but he had become a hollow one. At 36 years old, he was a celebrated founder of Callaway Labs, a biotech empire built from scratch. He had been a visionary, a disruptor, the kind of man who could raise $100 million with a phone call and change the trajectory of entire industries. But all of that brilliance could not save the woman he loved. Emily died during childbirth on a snowy morning nearly 2 years earlier, her heart failing after a cascade of complications no one had seen coming. And in that instant, the light left Ethan's eyes. He buried her in a private grove on his estate grounds, and he buried himself in work. The boy who lived was named Noah. Noah was born blind, not legally blind, fully blind, no perception of light, no pupil response, no reaction to movement. Specialists were brought in from Boston, Zurich, Tokyo. There were MRIs, ultrasounds, visual evoked potentials. The final diagnosis came from Dr. Harmon, a brilliant but reclusive neurologist, underdeveloped optic nerves, possibly cortical visual impairment. He may never see, the report had said. Prepare for a life without visual cues. Ethan had accepted it, not because he wanted to, but because it gave him something solid to hold on to in a world that no longer made sense. The boy was to be protected, cared for, kept safe. The nursery was redesigned to be tactile and sound-sensitive. A rotating team of highly trained nannies watched over him, led by the formidable Mrs. Lillian, who had served the Callaway family since Ethan himself was a child. And yet, despite all the attention, the love that should have surrounded Noah had gone cold. He did not cry often. He did not reach for things. He sat quietly in his custom-built crib, tracing the textures of his world with soft fingers and a faraway look in his pale blue eyes. Then Grace arrived. She was not the candidate anyone expected. 24 years old, freshly graduated from a community nursing program, with no luxury household experience and little more than a desperate smile. But there had been a last-minute cancellation. Someone had quit without warning. Grace had been sent by the agency as a live-in domestic, not a nanny, just a maid, really. She would clean, cook, keep things organized. Stay out of the nursery, Mrs. Lillian had told her. The boy has his own staff. Grace had nodded. She always nodded. Her resume had been thin, her references even thinner. She needed this job. She needed the room, the paycheck, the quiet. But from the first moment she stepped into the mansion, something didn't sit right. It wasn't the silence, it was the absence. As if the walls had forgotten what it meant to echo with life. As if the people in the house moved on schedules, not feelings. As if the boy, this small, luminous boy named Noah, was more shadow than child. Grace first saw him by accident. She was delivering fresh linens to the upstairs wing and passed by the open door of the nursery. He sat on a soft, gray playmat, hands drifting over a row of wooden blocks. A plush whale lay beside him, untouched. No one else was in the room. Grace hesitated. Just a second. Then he turned. His head shifted slightly toward her. His expression didn't change. His eyes didn't focus. But it was enough to make her pause. She had not made a sound. Later that night, Grace asked the kitchen assistant, quietly, what was wrong with the boy. The girl had only shrugged. Blind since birth, she whispered. Some brain thing. But sweet, quiet. It was quiet that unnerved Grace the most. In the weeks that followed, she did what she was told. She kept to her duties, learned the rhythms of the household, made herself invisible, but something in her nursing instincts refused to settle. Children were noisy, unpredictable, messy. They screamed and giggled and threw things. Noah didn't do any of that. One day, as she was folding tiny shirts in the laundry room connected to the nursery, she started humming, just softly, An old lullaby her mother used to sing. A habit, a reflex, and then she heard it. A shift, a breath, a giggle. She peered through the cracked door and saw Noah, head tilted toward the sound, smiling faintly. His fingers tapped the mat in rhythm with her tune. Grace went still. Had he heard her? She clapped her hands. Just once. He flinched. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a firework. Grace's heart skipped. That was not a flinch of surprise. That was a reaction to stimulus. A natural one. Too natural. She said nothing that night, or the next, but the thought took root and refused to leave. Grace didn't know what she was looking at yet, but she knew children. And something about this child, this boy who should not have responded, had. The mansion remained silent. But for the first time in years, something inside it had shifted, and it had started with a sound that should never have been noticed. The next morning, the gray Seattle sky draped itself over the Callaway estate like a weighted blanket. The mist pressed softly against the tall windows, and the lights inside flickered on automatically, adjusting to the gloom. Grace moved through the house with practiced quiet, carrying a small basket of folded towels. Her footsteps were light, her posture unassuming. She'd learned how to move unnoticed in spaces that were not hers. But today, her thoughts were anything but quiet. The image of Noah flinching at the sound of her clap lingered, replaying in her mind with increasing clarity. It hadn't been a twitch or a random movement. It had been precise, like a reflex. And that smile when he heard her hum? Children didn't fake that. They didn't perform. They reacted to what they sensed. And Grace could no longer convince herself that what she'd witnessed had been nothing. She didn't share her thoughts with anyone. Mrs. Lillian, always sharp-eyed and commanding, made it clear through posture alone that questioning things was unwelcome. Grace had quickly learned to keep her head down, follow instructions, and avoid stepping outside her lane. But now, curiosity simmered beneath her skin, mingling with something heavier, concern. That afternoon, she found herself stationed once again in the laundry alcove that adjoined Noah's nursery. She had no assignment there, just a reason to be close. Through the slightly open door, she could hear the soft thump of Noah's toys as he played. The head nanny had left the boy momentarily to take a call in the hallway. Grace paused at the threshold, listening. She didn't hum this time. She whispered, "Noah." There was no response. She took a breath and moved a step closer. "Noah," she said again, just a little louder. This time, the boy's head turned, not directly at her, but in the general direction of her voice. His fingers paused their movement over the textured play mat. Grace felt her pulse quicken. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and retrieved a keychain, just a small thing, with 2 or 3 metallic rings and a tiny bell at the end. She gave it a gentle shake. The boy's head turned again, this time more directly. Then, to her astonishment, he smiled. It wasn't broad, but it was unmistakable. She took one cautious step into the room, still shaking the keychain softly. Noah lifted his hands and stretched them out in front of him. Not blindly, purposefully. Grace froze. This wasn't what she'd been told to expect from a child with total blindness. This was orientation. This was interaction. Her fingers tightened around the keychain, suddenly aware of how fragile the moment was. She knelt, staying just outside the soft edge of the playmat. "Noah," she said softly, holding the keys a few inches from his face. "Can you hear this?" He reached toward the sound. His hand moved with surprising accuracy. Grace watched, transfixed, as his tiny fingers brushed the edge of the keychain. Just then, footsteps echoed from the hallway, sharp and fast. Grace jerked back instinctively, slipping the keychain into her pocket as Mrs. Lillian swept into the nursery. "Is there a reason you're in here?" Lillian asked, her tone clipped and disapproving. Grace rose slowly. "I heard something fall. I just wanted to make sure he was okay." Lillian's eyes narrowed. "This room is not your responsibility. If you hear something, inform one of the staff assigned him. Do not enter uninvited." "Yes, ma'am," Grace said quickly, lowering her gaze. The head nanny knelt beside the boy, her voice softening. "Are you all right, sweet pea?" Noah didn't respond, but his smile lingered. Lillian didn't seem to notice. Grace returned to her tasks, but her mind was elsewhere. What she had witnessed, twice now, defied the narrative everyone in the house accepted. Either Noah was not blind in the way they believed, or there was something else at play, something more complicated than a simple misdiagnosis. That night, unable to sleep, Grace sat at the edge of her small cot in the staff quarters, replaying every moment in her mind. She remembered a lecture from her neurodevelopmental pediatrics course, a guest speaker who had worked with children experiencing visual neglect rather than true blindness. The brain, she had said, can sometimes suppress visual processing due to trauma or overcompensation from other senses. It was rare, but it happened, and the signs were always subtle. She needed more evidence. Over the next few days, Grace observed with quiet intent. She watched how Noah moved through a space. She noted how he tilted his head when someone entered the room, how his body language shifted around sound, how he reached for objects that should have been beyond his range if he were navigating blindly, always in small ways, always with just enough ambiguity to dismiss, unless you were looking closely. One morning, while dusting the baseboards near the nursery door, she heard music playing from inside, a soft instrumental melody, gentle piano, and strings. It was one of the lullabies loaded onto Noah's interactive sound table. Grace peeked through the open door. He was standing, not on his own. He clung to the padded edge of his crib, but upright, bouncing slightly in time with the music. His head swayed. His hands tapped the surface. Then, unexpectedly, he let go with one hand turned and reached for a colorful rattle on the opposite side of the table. He found it without fumbling, fingers closing around the handle on the first try. Grace gasped quietly. Mrs. Lillian, seated in the corner with a tablet, didn't look up. That night, Grace wrote it all down. Every moment, every gesture, every reaction. A growing list of observations that painted a picture too detailed to ignore. But what disturbed her most was not what Noah could do. It was what everyone else seemed determined not to see. Why had no one questioned it? Why had the diagnosis never been revisited? Who stood to benefit from keeping things as they were? She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to start. Ethan Calloway's private study, tucked behind a biometric lock and a heavy oak door, was off limits to all staff. But Grace had learned that on Thursdays, he left for the office around 7 o'clock in the morning and didn't return until well past dinner. Mrs. Lillian spent that time overseeing the other children in the adjacent wing, children of visiting executives who sometimes stayed on the estate during transition periods. The nursery was quiet, and the hallways even quieter. Grace waited until noon. She walked past the study door 3 times before finally stopping. She reached into the apron she wore and pulled out a cleaning cloth, just in case someone passed by. Then she placed her hand on the biometric panel. Of course, it didn't respond. But to the left of the panel, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small, manual keyhole beneath the molding. Old-fashioned, unexpected. She had no key, but she'd once helped her younger brother out of a locked basement using a bent hairpin and a YouTube tutorial. It had taken her 20 minutes then. She was older now, more careful. She pulled a bobby pin from her hair and got to work. 10 minutes later, the door clicked open. Inside, the study was dim and minimalist. Dark walls, a polished desk, and a wall of filing cabinets. Grace didn't go for computer. She knew there would be passwords, encryption, dead ends. She went straight to the paper, and what she found made her breath catch. Noah's medical files. Some of them matched what she'd heard: diagnoses, referrals, early tests. But tucked between them were newer scans, newer notes. One dated only 4 months prior. No mention of optic nerve underdevelopment. No mention of cortical blindness. In fact, one report stated, no clear anatomical cause identified. Suggests follow-up under visual neuroplasticity protocol. She flipped through more papers, her hands trembling. Why had this report been hidden? Why had no one told the staff? Before she could read further, a sound startled her, a voice outside the study door. She stuffed the papers back in place, shut the drawer, and slipped out silently, her heart thudding so hard it echoed in her ears. Something was wrong in the Calloway estate, and it had started with a sound Noah should never have noticed. Grace waited until she was safely back in the laundry room before allowing her body to react. Her knees buckled slightly. Her breath came in shallow waves, and her hands trembled as they clutched the apron she'd used as a cover. What she'd read, what she'd barely had time to process, was enough to unravel the careful, polished image the Calloway estate projected to the world. The diagnosis she had seen in the file was clinical, vague, yet profoundly telling in what it didn't say. No clear anatomical cause. No optic nerve damage. Nothing conclusive to support full blindness. It was like reading a ghost story written in scientific language. The facts were there, but the meaning haunted her. She couldn't risk returning to the study. Not yet. The tension in the hallway had been real, voices rising and falling just feet away from the door. Whoever had been outside had lingered. Grace didn't know if they had seen the door slightly ajar or noticed anything missing. All she knew was that she had taken a risk, and now her understanding of the situation had shifted completely. Noah might not be blind at all. The question now was, why were they pretending he was? That evening, Grace lingered near the back of the kitchen, pretending to organize supplies. She watched the household staff move around her, most too focused on their own tasks to notice her presence. The estate ran like a machine. Every detail was managed with precision, every moment accounted for. It was efficient, impressive, and utterly devoid of warmth. She needed someone to talk to, but she trusted no one here, especially not Mrs. Lillian, who had already warned her once. Grace couldn't afford to raise alarms. Not until she had more than a gut feeling and a vague medical contradiction. 2 days passed before she got another opportunity. On Saturday afternoons, the estate was quieter. Ethan didn't work from the office on weekends, but he spent most of his time sequestered in his study or the underground lab, accessible only by the biometric lift. Staff was reduced. The other nannies rotated out for their weekly breaks. It was during this lull that Grace noticed something peculiar while changing out the linens in the guest suite across from the nursery. The built-in wall console outside Noah's room displayed a maintenance alert. Nanny cam malfunction. Last sync, 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks. She glanced toward the nursery door. It was closed, the interior quiet. She knew Noah was in there. Mrs. Lillian was downstairs in the greenhouse, tending to her orchids, and the rest of the childcare staff were temporarily absent. Grace crossed the hallway and knocked lightly, then entered. Noah was in his crib, humming softly to himself, his fingers tracing the bars of the railing. He looked up when she entered, his head turning slightly in that now familiar way. Grace smiled faintly. "Hi, little one," she whispered. "Just cleaning." She moved toward the bookshelf where the nanny cam was mounted, discreet, tucked beneath a false wooden panel. She reached up and pressed the reset button. Nothing. The light remained off. She opened the small panel and saw what she feared. The wires had been deliberately disconnected. Not frayed, not aged, cleanly pulled. Someone had disabled the camera. Grace didn't touch it again. She knew better than to leave evidence of tampering. Instead, she pulled her phone from her apron and positioned it discreetly on the top shelf, angled slightly downward. The camera lens was unobstructed. She hit record, locked the screen, and left the room without another word. She would return for the footage later. That night, after dinner, Grace retrieved the phone and excused herself early. In the quiet of her room, she played back the footage. For the first hour, Noah did very little. He played with a plush ball, crawled along the edge of the crib, and tapped on the musical panel embedded in the wall. Then, around 8:30, the footage shifted. He sat up, not just sat up. He rose to his knees and reached for a block that had rolled toward the far end of the crib. His hand landed on it with ease. No hesitation, no groping. Then he tossed it gently, watching where it landed. He laughed softly. Then, slowly, he crawled toward it again. It was not the movement of a child navigating by memory or by feel. It was the movement of a child who could see. Grace watched the clip 3 times. Her hand hovered over the pause button as she caught the clearest moment. Noah staring at the toy, waiting until it stopped rolling, and crawling directly toward it. His eyes followed it. His head tracked the movement. It was unmistakable. She downloaded the video to an encrypted folder in the cloud, saved a backup to her old nursing school drive, and deleted the original from her phone. The next morning, her behavior changed. Now on the outside, she still moved with the same care, the same feigned indifference, but inside, her purpose had shifted. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an investigator, a witness, maybe the only person in the house truly seeing the boy for who he was. She watched Mrs. Lillian more closely, noting how little interaction the head nanny had with Noah when no one was watching. She observed how the other staff deferred to Lillian, how no questions were ever raised about the child's condition. Every answer was the same: he's blind. Period. It was rehearsed, accepted, institutionalized. Grace couldn't stand it. She began researching Noah's condition late at night, using the estate's guest Wi-Fi and a throwaway email account. She found journal articles, case studies, message boards, everything she could dig up on cortical visual impairment and optic nerve hypoplasia. What stood out the most were the stories of misdiagnosis. In cases where early scans were inconclusive, children were often labeled as blind when, in reality, they suffered from delayed development or neuroplastic suppression. Some recovered partial vision. Some adapted and overcame. But the key factor in all those cases was continued assessment. Noah's file showed none of that. Just a single specialist name, Dr. Harmon, and then silence. She typed the name into the search bar, Dr. Malcolm Harmon. It didn't take long to find traces of him. He'd been a leading pediatric neurologist affiliated with several research institutions, but his name had disappeared from clinical directories over 6 months ago. His last public statement was a journal article on experimental vision therapies, published under an independent medical review, not through any university or hospital. And then nothing. No new articles. No conferences. No mentions. He was gone. Grace leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. The last time Dr. Harmon had been listed on a medical board was precisely the same time as the most recent file in Ethan's study. Something had happened, something big. She stared at the search results, debating her next move. Then she noticed a comment at the bottom of an archived forum thread. Someone had posted a farewell message from Harmon to his patients, redirecting urgent inquiries to a secure email address. It was vague and short-lived, only visible via cache data, but it was something. She copied the email and composed a message. Subject: urgent inquiry regarding Noah Calloway. Message: Dear Dr. Harmon, I apologize for contacting you without prior relationship, but I recently came across your name in connection to a patient, Noah Calloway. I am currently working at the Calloway estate and have come upon some irregularities in his medical documentation. I believe you were involved in his case and may have information that could help clarify what's truly going on with this child. I'm reaching out in confidence and concern. If you're able to speak, even briefly, please reply, Grace H. She hesitated only a moment before sending it. It felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't return from. She closed her laptop, shut off the lights, and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. At 2:43 in the morning, her phone buzzed softly. One new message from Dr. H. reply@protonmail.com. Message: I was waiting for someone to ask. Noah's condition was never what they told you. If you want the truth, look into the incident at Calloway Labs last winter. MH. Grace sat up, heart pounding. There it was. Not just suspicion. Not just theory. Confirmation. Sunday morning broke cold and quiet over the Calloway estate, with clouds hanging low over the sound and frost beginning to crystallize along the glass railings of the upper balconies. Inside, the staff moved a little slower than usual, as if the weight of the October chill pressed down even beneath the roof. Grace moved through the halls with care, her face composed but her mind alert. She had not slept after receiving Dr. Harmon's cryptic reply. His message had been brief, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Something had happened at Calloway Labs, and it had everything to do with Noah's condition. Grace knew better than to mention the email to anyone. There was no telling who knew what, or who might be watching. But the quiet secrecy she relied on up until now no longer served her. She needed to ask questions. She needed someone to talk to. And the only person who had been with Noah since the beginning, who might hold even a piece of the truth, was Mrs. Lillian. It was not a decision Grace made lightly. The head nanny had always kept her distance. She ran the nursery staff with strict precision and tolerated no interference. Her background was impressive. Trained in developmental care, with decades of experience in high-profile homes. The other maids called her the Iron Matron behind her back, and Grace had rarely seen her show more than a flicker of emotion, even with Noah. But something about that restraint now struck Grace differently. Maybe it was protection. Maybe it was fear. Either way, Grace knew the woman wasn't blind to everything going on in this house. She waited until mid-morning, when the estate was quiet again and the other staff were out of the nursery. Lillian was seated in her usual chair near the window, her tablet open on her lap, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. Grace stepped inside and gently closed the door behind her. Lillian didn't look up. "Do you need something?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with expectation. Grace didn't answer right away. She crossed the room slowly and stood by the far end of the crib, where Noah was napping, his small chest rising and falling beneath a soft blue blanket. "I want to talk about Noah," she said quietly. Lillian's eyes lifted, sharp and steady. "That's not your place." "Maybe it isn't," Grace replied, keeping her tone even. "But I think something is wrong, and I think you know it." Lillian set her tablet down. "I warned you before," she said. "You're here to clean. This child has been through more than you can imagine. What you think you've seen is not what you think it is." "I'm not making guesses," Grace said. "I'm trained. I've worked with visually impaired children before. Noah's responses, his eye tracking, his physical orientation, they don't match his diagnosis." Lillian's face hardened. "You read the files?" "I had to," Grace said. "The truth is being hidden. And you've seen it too, haven't you?" There was a pause. A long, heavy silence filled with more meaning than words could hold. Lillian looked away for a moment, her gaze settling on the floor near the crib. "What exactly do you think is happening?" she asked finally, the edge in her voice quieter now, less defensive. "I think someone made a decision about Noah's condition a long time ago," Grace said, "and now everyone is expected to live with that version of reality. But it's not the truth. He's not blind. At least, not in the way we've been told. And I think you know it's not just medical. Something else is going on. Something that has to do with his father, with Callaway Labs." Lillian's jaw clenched. "You're treading into dangerous waters," she said. "I don't care," Grace replied. "Noah deserves better than this. He deserves to know what's real. And so do you." Lillian stood slowly, walked past the crib, and closed the blinds, darkening the room. Her movements were deliberate, measured. Then she turned to face Grace again. "I have served this family since Ethan was younger than Noah is now," she said. "I was here when his mother died. I was here the night that child was born. And I was here when the doctor came in with the scan results that shattered what was left of this house. I have kept order. I have kept the boy safe. That was my job." Grace listened, heart pounding. "And," she asked, "and I've seen things I can't explain," Lillian said quietly. "Things that don't add up. Things that make me wonder if the grief in this house hasn't blinded more than just a child." She looked down at the crib. "There were moments in the first year when I thought I saw him respond to light, or reach for something he shouldn't have known was there. But every time I brought it up, Ethan shut me down. Hard. Said I was imagining things. That the specialists were sure. That the matter was closed. I had no authority to question him. Not then. Not now." Grace stepped closer. "Why would he want to believe his son is blind if he isn't?" Lillian hesitated. "Because it's easier," she said finally. "Because if Noah's condition is permanent, if it was the cause of a tragedy, then Ethan doesn't have to look at the choices he made. The trial, the risk, the price Emily paid. If this is just fate, he doesn't have to carry the blame." Grace felt her breath catch. "What trial?" Lillian's eyes widened. Only slightly, but it was enough. "You weren't supposed to know about that," she whispered. "Dr. Harmon told me to look into the incident at Callaway Labs last winter." The air in the room shifted. Lillian's hand gripped the edge of the crib, her knuckles pale. "I don't know everything," she said. But I know there was a project, something experimental. Emily didn't want it. She was terrified. Ethan insisted, said it could give Noah a chance other children would never have. He never admitted what happened after. Just closed the doors. Told us all to follow protocol. I didn't ask again. Grace took a slow breath. Do you still believe that's the right thing to do? Lillian didn't answer. A few moments passed before she stepped back and walked toward the built-in cabinet by the wall. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thin black binder, and handed it to Grace. What is this? Grace asked. A schedule log, Lillian said. Entries for the first 6 months after Noah was born. You'll see notes from other staff who didn't stay long. One of them, Marissa, kept writing about visual tracking. She was dismissed a week after her third note. I was told to erase the logs. I didn't. Grace opened the binder and flipped through the pages. Sure enough, entries highlighted specific moments. Noah following a light source, turning toward movement, reaching for toys across the crib without tactile cues. It was all there. This is what I need, Grace said. This is proof. It's not enough, Lillian said. Not to change anything. Ethan won't listen to you. And if you push too hard, you'll be gone like the others. Then I'll go to someone who will listen, Grace said. The board, the press, anyone who will make this stop. Lillian met her gaze. If you do that, you put Noah in danger, she said. You don't understand the people around Ethan. You don't know how deep this goes. The research, the investors, the patents. If someone buried what happened at that lab, they won't let you dig it up without a fight. I'm not afraid of them, Grace said. You should be. But Lillian's voice wasn't cold anymore. It was heavy, tired. You're not wrong, Grace, she said finally. But you need to be smart. Do what you have to. Just don't do it alone. With that, she turned and walked out of the nursery, leaving Grace with a binder in her hands and the sound of Noah's quiet breathing in the background. For the first time since she'd entered this house, Grace no longer felt alone in what she knew, but she also knew the warning was real. Something dangerous had been hidden under layers of grief, silence, and power. And now, she was no longer just uncovering the truth. She was threatening to expose it. And someone, somewhere in this house or beyond, would not let that happen easily. Monday came with a pale sun filtering through fog glass, casting soft beams across the nursery's polished floors. The house was unusually quiet that morning. Ethan had left early, and most of the executive staff were off-site preparing for a quarterly investor meeting. Grace moved with calm determination, her uniform pressed, her movements deliberate, but her thoughts churned beneath the surface like a storm pulling at the tide. She now held 2 pieces of proof: the binder of early logs documenting signs of vision in Noah and the video she had secretly recorded. Still, the truth remained buried beneath layers of silence and power. She needed more. The broken nanny cam had become a focal point in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Why it was disconnected, who had done it, and what it might have once captured. Cameras in rooms like these weren't just for security. They were often used for therapeutic monitoring, helping specialists analyze behavior patterns. But in this house, the camera had been silenced just like everything else. Grace decided it was time to replace it completely. After the breakfast shift, she made her way to the back service hallway where old supplies were kept. The shelves were cluttered with forgotten electronics, dusty boxes, and outdated baby monitors. She found a small, portable security camera still in its packaging, a model she recognized from her caregiving training. It was discreet, wireless, and easy to sync with phone. Grace tucked it into her apron and returned to the nursery, heart pounding with every step. Noah was seated on his mat, stacking wooden blocks. Lillian was in the greenhouse again, and the other nanny assigned to the boy was on a break. The window of opportunity was narrow. Grace moved quickly, pretending to dust the upper shelves while replacing the broken nanny cam with a new device. She synced it silently to her backup phone, positioned it to capture the entire crib and play area, then returned the shelf panel to its original state. The camera light blinked once, then disappeared into standby mode. It was live. Later that afternoon, Grace found a moment to review the live feed from the staff corridor. Noah was playing quietly, Nothing seemed unusual. She watched for several minutes before slipping the phone back into her pocket. This time, she would let it run for the full night. That evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted slightly. Ethan returned just before dinner, his face more drawn than usual, his tone clipped during brief conversations with staff. He didn't enter the nursery, but Grace caught him pausing by the door as she exited with a load of laundry. Their eyes met for a second. He gave a faint nod, an acknowledgement perhaps, but said nothing. By midnight, the estate was silent. The wind outside rattled the upper windows, and the low hum of electronics filled the dark hallways. Grace lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. At exactly 12:30, she opened the camera feed. The nursery was still. Noah lay on his side, blanket kicked halfway off, one arm resting near his face. The soft glow from the nightlight bathed the room in a gentle amber hue. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Grace nearly gave up. Then, just after 1 a.m, movement. Noah sat up, not abruptly, but gradually, as if pulled from sleep by some unseen signal. He rubbed his eyes, blinked several times, then looked across the room. He didn't grope. He didn't reach blindly. He scanned. Then he pushed the blanket aside and crawled across the crib to the other end, where a small plush bear lay. He picked it up, turned in his hands, then tossed it softly toward the mat outside the crib rails. The bear bounced once and landed. Noah watched it fall. Grace froze, breath caught in her throat. Noah's eyes tracked the movement, followed the arc. A blind child could not do that. She knew it now, undeniably. Then, slowly he stood, hands gripping the railing, and looked down at the toy. What happened next changed everything. Noah called out. Not a word, but a sound high-pitched and questioning. A testing cry, as if checking to see if someone would come. No one did. He reached for the side of the crib, hesitated, then began to climb. Grace sat upright in her bed, horrified. Noah lifted one leg over the rail. He had done this before. His body moved with quiet confidence. Within seconds, he dropped softly to the padded mat below. He landed on his feet, stumbled once, then walked toward the bear. Not crawling, walking. His arms were out slightly, but his steps were direct. His gaze remained fixed on the toy. He picked it up, hugged it, then turned toward the wall and began to tap along a familiar spot beneath the window ledge. He was looking for something. Then he found it, a drawer built into the wall, where sensory toys were stored. He opened it, sifted through its contents, and retrieved a small, reflective disc, the kind used in therapy to catch light and train visual response. He held it up and turned it slightly, letting the nightlight reflect off the surface. The glimmer played across the ceiling. Noah's eyes followed the shimmer. Followed it. Grace covered her mouth, heart pounding so hard she could barely think. He wasn't just seeing. He was playing with light. She let the feed run until he returned to his crib, climbed back in, and pulled the blanket over himself. It was after 2 o'clock in the morning. The next day, Grace copied the footage, locked it in her encrypted folder, and burned a second copy onto a password-protected flash drive she kept hidden in the lining of her coat. She barely spoke all morning. When she saw Lillian near the courtyard entrance, she whispered only 2 words. "It's real." Lillian's eyes held hers for a moment, then turned away. Just before lunch, as Grace was cleaning the study hallway, she heard raised voices behind Ethan's closed office door. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Tension, anger, denial. A man's voice, Ethan's, argued with someone over the phone. Then silence. The door opened suddenly. Ethan stepped out, phone still in hand, jaw clenched. When he saw Grace, he stopped. "Something you need?" he asked. "No, sir," she replied, but didn't move. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been spending a lot of time near the nursery. I clean what I'm assigned." He studied her, searching her face for something unspoken. Grace didn't flinch. She wasn't hiding anymore. "I'll be updating some protocols this week," he said. "Have Mrs. Lillian send you the memo." She nodded. He turned and walked away. That evening, the new camera was gone. When Grace returned to the nursery for her shift, the shelf was empty. The panel was closed. No sign of the device. But something else had changed. Noah was sitting quietly in his crib, but his eyes were swollen, red. He had cried. Grace stepped closer, voice soft. "Noah, are you okay?" He didn't answer, just turned his face away. Someone had been there. Someone had seen the camera, seen what he could do, and had made sure the truth stayed buried. Grace looked at the shelf again, her hands clenched. It was no longer a question of whether Noah could see. Now it was a question of how far someone was willing to go to make sure the world never found out. Grace sat at the small writing desk in the maid quarters, the thin curtains pulled back just enough to let in the fading twilight. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, the message to Dr. Harmon already sent, and sitting in her sent folder, an invisible line crossed, a world of consequences opening in that quiet moment. Her mind replayed the email he had sent. Noah's condition was never what they told you. Look into the incident at Callaway Labs last winter. That phrase, the incident, echoed in her head like the toll of a distant warning bell. She closed her laptop and inhaled deeply. Outside the window, the safety lights on the estate's driveway glowed orange in the dusk, illuminating the tree-lined path that led to the garage. A private car sat parked there, engine quiet. Ethan was home. Somewhere in the house, the cogs of power turned silently. Grace rose and walked the corridor that led to the nursery. The corridor always felt colder than the rest of the house. The carpeting muted sound, the lighting dimmed automatically, as though the design encouraged distance. She paused at the nursery door, the blinds drawn, and peeked through the little slit of glass. Inside, Noah sat cross-legged on his playmat, humming softly. The expression on his face was calm, untroubled. He didn't seem altered by the secrets swirling around him. Grace knocked lightly. "Lillian," she whispered. The head nanny appeared, coat draped over her arm, her tablet pressed like a shield in one hand. Her eyes were sharp. "You needed something?" Lillian asked, voice low. Grace swallowed. "Yes, I wrote to Dr. Harmon." She watched Lillian's reaction, just a flicker of color to the cheeks, a slight inhale. "And?" Lillian said. "He replied," Grace said. "He said the incident at Callaway Labs last winter matters for Noah." Lillian's stern mask slipped for a moment. "That information isn't yours to pursue." She folded her tablet and set it aside. "You are here to care, clean support, not investigate." Grace's voice was soft but firm. "When it's a child who might be seeing what he shouldn't and someone is hiding it, I don't think caring means staying silent." Lillian faced her across the mat, the boys' toys between them. "You knew what you were stepping into when you took the job," she said quietly. "You accepted rules. You promised discretion." Grace nodded. "I did, but rules don't make truth go away." A tension stretched between them, heavy with implied threat and unspoken alliances. Lillian's gaze didn't soften. "Fine," she said finally. "You want the doctor? I'll help you, but you must listen, and you must not act alone." She turned and glanced toward the corridor. "If you go further without that, you're not just risking your job, you're risking the boy." Grace's heart hammered. The weight of the words sank in. "What doctor?" Grace asked. Lillian took a breath, then stepped closer, voice barely a whisper. "Dr. Malcolm Harmon. He came here last year, winter, a trial. He objected. He left. He disappeared. And no one asked properly what happened." Grace closed her eyes. She had searched for Harmon and found traces, a trail that led cold. He had published research, then vanished. No public relations, no further studies. Just silence. She asked a question she'd feared asking aloud. Why did he leave? Lillian didn't answer immediately. She walked to the crib and touched the railing lightly. Looked at Noah. The child was still humming, eyes half closed. "She found out something," Lillian said at last. "Emily did. Your boss's wife. Before she died. She found out about the trial, the risk, and she made him promise. Ethan to protect their son. But that promise changed after she was gone. The trial was shelved. The data sealed. The doctor was paid off. Or threatened or something worse." Grace's fingers clenched. "And you just watched." Lillian nodded once. I stayed silent because I feared what I couldn't fight, because I believed at some point someone would step in, because I didn't want to lose the boy. Grace leaned forward. I want you to give me everything you have, files, names, dates, logs. I will go to Dr. Harmon. I will find out what happened. Lillian's voice broke slightly. Then we must be fast, because if someone is hiding this, they are already moving. I saw men in security vans outside the lab that night. After the incident, unmarked vehicles. The cleanup started in the hours after the alarm. By morning, the sensors were wiped, the logs changed, and the building closed for 2 days. Grace swallowed. 2 days, she echoed. Yes, 2 days. Then it reopened like nothing happened. Lillian's hand drifted to the binders and data boxes she had collected over time, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief until the next version of the story was locked in place. Blindness. Final. Unchangeable. And the boy accepted it. Grace touched the stack of boxes. Where are they now? Hidden, Lillian said. In a safe room. I can get them. But right now you need to speak with Harmon and get a meeting. He is somewhere in the States. I tracked him briefly last month. New lease in a remote town. He's scared. The term scared landed in Grace's mind with a pulse. Do you still believe his work can help Noah? I do, Lillian answered, her voice steady. But I also believe one man can't fight an empire. She looked up. You will need help. You'll need proof. And you'll need him to speak before they silence him entirely. Grace's chest tightened. Then we will. Lillian nodded. A moment of shared determination passed between them. The boy's humming grew louder, a single note trailing into silence as he dropped his toy and shifted. Grace turned to leave. Be sure you take nothing visible from the house, Lillian said. No devices. No copying of major files. If they suspect, they'll come, and they won't ask nicely. Grace paused at the door, hand on the knob, and looked back at the sleeper. I'll keep him safe. She stepped out, leaving the nursery quiet again, and walked the corridor toward the service elevator. That night, Grace packed a small bag, a laptop, an encrypted flash drive, the binder Lillian had given her, and a printed map of Harmon's last known location. Her heart throbbed with a mixture of dread and hope. She knew the stakes had changed. Earlier in the evening, the intercom had buzzed for her, an unexpected page to the main controller. She had checked. Nothing was logged. Someone had requested her presence. She ignored it. When she returned from a laundry shift, she found her coat missing. Not stolen, just gone. There was no sign of break-in, no alarm. But the coat had disappeared from the staff quarters. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, the thought chilling her. Someone had been inside. She felt exposed. She made a decision. Tomorrow she would speak to Dr. Harmon. She would stop waiting. She couldn't wonder anymore whether Noah's condition was real or controlled. She would act, and she would not do it alone. At 1:00 in the morning, she crept back to the nursery, using the universal passcode for cleaning staff. The door opened silently. The room was bathed in moonlight through the large west-facing window. The crib was empty. The play mat was unoccupied. Grace's breath caught. She stepped inside quickly. Her eyes darted across the floor. No toy on the mat. The reflective disc she had seen Noah playing with was missing. The plush bear, too. A cold sense of dread seized her. She knelt and touched the soft padding. No prints, no disturbance. But a tuft of fabric caught on the rail. She held the tuft between her fingers. It was the red stitching of the bear's ear. Someone had taken the toys. And maybe taken the boy's time of unmonitored motion. Grace's pulse raced. The mansion, silent, clean, unfeeling, had betrayed its secret again. She rose and rushed out, the door closing behind her with a quiet click. Tomorrow, she would wake Ethan Calloway and ask him to explain everything. Tomorrow, she would try to save his son. The following morning broke sharp and bright. The Seattle sky unusually clear as the sunlight cut across the Calloway estate's stark, modern lines. Inside, the tension clung to every surface. Grace woke before dawn, already dressed, her bag zipped and hidden under her bed. She had barely slept, and her pulse was relentless. The nursery's strange emptiness from the night before had left her cold. Noah was back at his crib by the time the staff began their morning routine. Lillian confirmed it in a whisper. No explanation. No one had seen who had removed the toys, and no one spoke of it. But Grace knew. Someone in the house was watching. Someone had noticed her movements. And whoever they were, they had already started pushing back. By 8:30, Grace was in the west corridor outside the home office. She waited there, her hands damp with anticipation, heart pounding hard in her chest. She wasn't just bringing observations this time. She wasn't just asking questions. She had the footage, the files, the binder, and she had a voice that would not quiet. When the office door opened and Ethan stepped out, briefcase in hand and coffee in the other, Grace moved to intercept him. "Mr. Calloway," she said, firmly but respectfully. He paused, not expecting to see her there. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Grace, something wrong. I need to speak with you. Privately." Ethan checked his watch. "I have a meeting in 40 minutes. This can't wait." There was something in her voice, something steady and dangerous. He studied her, then gave a short nod. "Come in." The office was clean, clinical. 2 chairs across from a wide black desk. A wall of screens on one side, a glass cabinet of awards and biotech patents on the other. Ethan gestured for her to sit, then closed the door. "What is it?" he asked. "Did something happen to Noah?" Grace didn't sit. "I think he can see," she said clearly. Ethan didn't react at first. He simply blinked, the air still between them. Then a low chuckle escaped his throat. Not humor, disbelief, dismissal. "Grace," he said, "I know you care about my son, and I appreciate the dedication. But we've been over this." His condition was confirmed by specialists. He was born without. "I've seen him track objects across the room," she interrupted. "Reach for toys. Follow light. I have video. I've read the logs Lillian hid. I've spoken to Dr. Harmon." At that, Ethan stiffened. The temperature in the room dropped. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low and sharp. "I emailed him." Grace continued, unwavering. "He told me the truth about what happened at the lab, about the trial, about how Emily didn't want Noah to be part of it." Ethan set his coffee down hard enough that the mug rattled. "You're out of line," he said. "I don't know what stories you think you've uncovered or what you think you've proven, but you're a maid in my house. You don't have the right to." "I'm also a licensed nurse," she snapped back. "And what I've seen would raise alarms in any facility. A child with a misdiagnosis is serious, who's been trained to ignore his vision, to suppress it. This isn't just medical negligence. It's psychological trauma." Ethan stood. "You are fired." The words landed like a slap. Grace's breath caught, but she didn't move. "You'll be off the property by the end of the day," he said. "Your contract is terminated. And if you so much as speak about this to anyone outside this house—" "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "Why are you so afraid of the truth?" Ethan turned away, running a hand through his hair. His shoulders were rigid. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, but not softer. "You think you know what happened?" he said. "You think a few files and a child's reaction to a toy gives you insight into what I've lost? What this family has lost?" Grace stepped closer. "Then tell me why you're still pretending your son is blind when he's not. Tell me why you silenced Dr. Harmon, why you made your staff write false logs, why you're so afraid to look at your child and see what's right in front of you." Ethan turned then, his eyes sharp and furious. But beneath the fury, Grace saw something else. Grief. Real, thick, unbearable grief. "She died," he said quietly. "Emily died because I believed in something I shouldn't have. I pushed for the trial. I convinced her it was safe. I told her it would give our son a future. And when she was gone, all I had left was Noah, and this lie that maybe if I controlled everything, I could keep him safe." His voice cracked. "But I couldn't fix what I'd done. So I buried it. I buried everything." Grace stared at him, her anger faltering. "But you don't have to keep doing that," she said. "You can stop. You can help him now. You can undo some of the damage. Ethan sat down heavily in his chair. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence between them was thick, and Grace didn't dare break it. Then he spoke. "I want to see the footage." Without a word, Grace pulled her phone from her apron pocket and opened the video. She handed it to him. He watched. Minute by minute, his face changed. Not all at once, not with shock, but with layers of disbelief, realization, and, finally, something deeper, shame, when the video ended. He set the phone down gently on the desk. "I need some time," he said. Grace nodded. "I'll be in the nursery." She left the office without another word. Later that night, long after dinner, Grace was folding linens in the back hall when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Ethan standing there, still in the same clothes, his face pale but calm. "I reviewed everything," he said. "Your footage, the logs, the files Harmon sent me back when I still trusted him. And you're right." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I let my guilt dictate my son's life. I believed the lie because it was easier than living with what I'd done. But I can't do it anymore." Grace exhaled. "I need your help," he said. "If I'm going to face the board, if I'm going to bring Harmon back, I can't do it alone." "You won't have to," Grace said. He gave her a single nod, then turned and walked back toward the office. And for the first time since she'd stepped into the Calloway estate, Grace felt the house shift, not in tension, but in resolve. The mansion was different now. It wasn't a change that could be measured in light or sound or temperature, but it was there, in the way the walls no longer seemed so cold, in the way Ethan Calloway's footsteps slowed when he passed the nursery door. Something had cracked open the sealed air of the estate. Grace felt it every time she looked at Noah and saw him react to the world as a child who saw, not one who was blind. Ethan had not spoken much since watching the footage. He was a man drowning in silence, suffocating under the weight of his own choices. Grace had given him space, but that didn't mean she had stopped moving forward. If anything, she moved faster. Now that he knew, now that denial no longer shielded him, she needed to uncover the rest. Whatever lay buried beneath the sleek floors of the Calloway empire, the answer came 2 days later. It was a gray afternoon, rain misting over the glass windows in steady rhythm. Grace had just finished a quiet lunch in the staff wing when she returned to her room and found an envelope slid under her door. No return address. No writing on the front. Inside, a small flash drive. Taped to it, a note. He kept a backup. "You were right to keep digging. See, Clara, Ethan's estranged sister. Grace had heard of her only in passing. Mentioned once by Lillian during a rare conversation. Clara Calloway had distanced herself from the family empire years ago, citing ethical disagreements. She had been close to Emily, even closer after Emily's pregnancy. Grace had tried once to track her down, but Clara had vanished from public life after Emily's death. Now she had made contact. Grace locked the door behind her, closed the curtains, and inserted the drive into her laptop. A folder loaded immediately. Inside, documents labeled with dates, project codes, trial subjects. At first glance, it looked like any research archive, dry, technical, dense with scientific language. But as she opened each file, a different story emerged. The documents weren't public. They had been pulled directly from Calloway Labs' internal servers. Most were marked confidential Level 3 clearance. And within them, buried under layers of clinical data, was the truth. Project Halcyon, an experimental retinal treatment designed to accelerate optic nerve development in utero. The theory was radical. Inject a compound into the amniotic fluid during the second trimester, triggering gene expression that would otherwise lie dormant. Ethan's name was on every authorization form. He had approved the protocol, funded the project, pushed it forward, even after the advisory board voted to suspend it. There was a list of initial subjects. Most had been terminated from the study. One file remained marked as ongoing. Subject, NC, Noah Calloway. Grace's chest tightened. She kept reading. The files included MRI scans taken when Noah was 3 months old. Scans that showed developing optic nerves, not absent ones. Notes from a lab technician questioned the inconsistency between the scans and the initial diagnosis. Another email from Dr. Harmon asked why the data wasn't being included in the clinical report. That message was never answered. Then came the incident report. One winter night, December 14th of the previous year, an alarm triggered inside Lab 3. Power was cut. Backup generators engaged, but the security logs were wiped. A fire suppression system activated despite no fire being detected. Several hard drives were destroyed in what was later described as an electrical malfunction. But Harmon's notes, included in the drive, suggested otherwise. He had been on site that night. His final entry, dated the morning after the event, was short. I believe the suppression system was remotely triggered. I believe the data was intentionally erased. Noah's case was central to the study. Without it, Halcyon has no results. They buried the evidence. Grace sat back in her chair, stunned. Ethan hadn't just lost control of his own project. Someone inside the company had sabotaged it. And in the chaos, the truth about Noah had been rewritten. She closed the laptop and stood, pacing the room. Clara must have had access to Harmon's private logs, either through him directly or through her own sources. But the question now wasn't just what happened. It was who had made it happen, and why. That evening, Ethan found her in the garden courtyard. It was raining, but he didn't seem to care. He stood beneath the stone archway, coat damp, eyes shadowed. "I saw the envelope," he said. Grace turned toward him, unsurprised. "Clara sent it. She's been trying to take me down for years," he muttered. "I thought she was just angry about how we handled Emily's funeral. Turns out she's been keeping her own files. She was trying to protect Noah," Grace said. He looked away. Everyone was. Grace pulled the flash drive from her pocket and handed it to him. "You need to see it for yourself. This isn't just about you anymore. Someone sabotaged the trial. They made it look like your work failed. They erased everything, except what Clara saved." Ethan took the drive, turning it over in his hand. "This could destroy everything," he said. "Callaway Labs, my board, my name. Or it could save your son," Grace said. "You decide which matters more." He met her gaze then, and in that moment, Grace saw something new in him. Not the cold executive or the broken father, but a man who had spent too long running from himself. "Tomorrow," he said, "we call Harmon. We bring Clara in. We open this." "Good," Grace said, "because we're running out of time." As they walked back toward the mansion, the lights inside flickered briefly. A warning. Somewhere in the house, or far beyond it, someone else was watching. And now that the truth was close to surfacing, Grace knew they would do anything to stop it. The next morning arrived without ceremony, cloaked in heavy clouds and a biting wind that slipped through the cracks of the vast Callaway estate. The air carried an electric stillness, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Inside, Grace prepared for the day with a quiet urgency. She had barely slept after reviewing every file Clara had sent, but the exhaustion didn't matter. Today was about answers, and she knew exactly where to find the next one. Emily Callaway had always been a shadow in every conversation, a beloved presence lost too soon, her death wrapped in tragedy and silence. But Grace knew from Lillian, and now from Clara's quiet defiance, that Emily had not gone quietly. She had resisted the Halcyon trial. She had warned Ethan, and somewhere, she had left behind her doubts. Grace believed that if there was anyone who could bridge the gap between the child Noah was and the child he could become, it would be the woman who had brought him into the world. At 10 o'clock that morning, Ethan drove them both into the city. It was the first time Grace had left the estate since she was hired. The city felt louder than she remembered, the buildings taller, the traffic more aggressive. Ethan drove in silence, his face unreadable. He hadn't said much since agreeing to confront the truth. But when she asked him if he would take her to see Clara, he had only nodded. They arrived at a modest house tucked into the outer edge of Capitol Hill. The home was older, brick and ivy covered, surrounded by a narrow garden and a wrought iron fence. Clara answered the door before they knocked. She was a mirror of her brother in some ways. Tall, severe, with the same dark eyes and angular face. But where Ethan wore his grief like armor, Clara wore hers like fire. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, stepping aside to let them in. I wasn't ready before, Ethan replied quietly. Grace followed them into the living room. It was warm and lived in, filled with books and photos and plants. On the mantel above the fireplace was a framed portrait of Emily, laughing, one hand on her belly. Grace paused in front of it. She hated the idea of halcyon, Clara said, not turning. She told me about it in whispers. Said Ethan wanted to enroll the baby. Said he called it a legacy project. I told her to run. I wasn't trying to hurt them, Ethan said. I believe in the science. I thought we could do something no one else had done. Even after she begged you not to, the room fell into silence. Clara moved to a cabinet in the far corner and opened it slowly. From inside, she retrieved a worn leather journal. Emily started writing this during her second trimester, she said. At first, it was just symptoms, dreams, things she wanted to remember. Then, after the lab meeting started, it changed. She handed the journal to Grace. She didn't want it in the house. She asked me to keep it. Grace opened the journal and began reading. The early entries were soft and filled with hope. Notes about cravings, thoughts about baby names, gentle fears about motherhood. But around the middle, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew tighter. One entry caught Grace's eye. Ethan says the injection is harmless, that the data is solid. But I don't trust it. Dr. Harmon won't look me in the eye anymore. I asked if the treatment could hurt the baby. He said it was too early to know. That scared me more than anything. Another entry, a few days later. I told Ethan I don't want to move forward. I told him no. He got quiet, said I was being irrational, that I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm starting to think he made the decision without me. Grace's fingers tightened around the page. I thought about publishing it after she died, Clara said softly, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Ethan's grief made him untouchable. The board swept everything under the rug, and by the time Harmon disappeared, the narrative was locked in place. I was wrong, Ethan said, voice low. I know that now. I thought I could save her. I thought I could save him. And I ended up burying both. Noah's not lost, Grace said, still flipping to the final pages of the journal. He's still here. He's still fighting to be seen. And if Emily left all this behind, then she believed someone would come looking for the truth. She turned to the last entry. It was dated 3 days before Emily went into labor. I'm scared. I think Ethan has already approved the trial, even though I said no. I don't know what's going to happen to our baby. If anything happens to me, I hope someone finds this. I hope someone listens. Please don't let them forget what I knew in my bones. Noah is not a test subject. He's our son. Grace closed the journal and looked up. She knew, she whispered. She knew he wouldn't listen, but she still wrote it down. Ethan didn't respond. He sat on the edge of the couch, eyes fixed on the journal, like it was a weapon. We have everything we need now, Clara said. Between the files, the footage, the journal, this is more than enough to dismantle the story the board has been telling. They'll come after us, Ethan said, if we go public. They'll come after you anyway, Clara replied, especially if they know Harmon's back in the picture. Grace looked between them. So we don't go public. Not yet. We bring Harmon in first. We get him to testify. We file whistleblower protection. We use the law to force the board hand. You really think that will be enough? Ethan asked. Grace nodded. It has to be, because Noah's still living in that house. And now that they know we're close, they won't wait long to act. Clara reached out and touched her brother's shoulder for the first time since they arrived. You can't undo what happened, she said, but you can stop pretending it didn't. They left with the journal. By the time they returned to the estate, the rain had stopped, but the clouds hung heavier than ever. Inside, Grace checked the nursery. Noah was sleeping peacefully, his favorite bear tucked under one arm. But something about the way his blanket was folded, too precise, too intentional, made her pause. Someone had been in the room again. She turned to leave and nearly collided with Lillian in the hallway. They know, Lillian whispered. They've started watching the staff more closely. One of the security agents asked about your schedule. Grace's stomach turned. They're closing in. Then whatever you're going to do, Lillian said, you need to do it now. That night, Grace made one final call to Dr. Harmon's secure line. She left a message. We have the files. We have Emily's journal. And we're ready to fight back. If you still want to help Noah come home. The reply came just after midnight in a short, encrypted message. I'm on the next flight. Keep him safe until I get there. MH. Grace stared at the screen, then closed her eyes. It was time. The conference room on the top floor of Callaway Labs was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls framed a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, while the long black conference tables seemed to stretch into infinity, surrounded by leather chairs so pristine they looked untouched. On the surface, the room was all order and control, just like the men and women who had filled it that morning. But under the polished surface, tension simmered. Ethan stood at the head of the table, a folder in his hand, and his jaw set with quiet defiance. Across from him, 12 executives sat in perfect rows, their suits sharp, their expressions unreadable. Some were board members who had supported him for over a decade. Others were younger, newer, brought in after Emily's death. Strategic minds who looked at Callaway Labs not as a legacy, but as a product. And at the center of them all sat Charles Whitmore, the acting chairman, a man with ice in his eyes and a reputation for burying problems before they could breathe. Grace stood just outside the room in the adjacent observation suite. The glass there was tinted. She could see them, but they couldn't see her. Beside her stood Clara, arms crossed, eyes hard, and Dr. Harmon, newly returned, freshly shaved and dressed in a modest suit that barely had the nerves in his shoulders. I can't believe I'm standing here again, Harmon said, voice low. The last time I entered this building, they had 2 men waiting to escort me out the back. This time you have us, Clara said flatly. They'll fight, Grace said, but we don't need their agreement. We just need to present the truth on record. After that, legal channels can take over. Inside the boardroom, Ethan opened a folder and began. 2 years ago, we launched Project Halcyon under the pretense of advancing prenatal neurooptic development. The research was classified, internally funded, and overseen by this board. One subject remained active, my son. A murmur ran through the table. That trial, Whitmore interrupted, was suspended following an internal investigation after the lab fire. You yourself signed the order to end it. Yes, Ethan said, because I was made to believe the data was lost, that the trial failed, that the risks outweighed the potential gains. What I wasn't told was that the data hadn't been lost. It had been destroyed. And the trial wasn't a failure. It was sabotage. A ripple of discomfort moved across the room. Several board members exchanged glances. Ethan continued. 2 nights ago, I was given a copy of the original research files, the full logs, the MRI scans, the treatment outcomes. Subject NC Noah Callaway did not show symptoms of blindness due to optic nerve hypoplasia. In fact, his scans indicated healthy visual structures. The only possible explanation for his condition was environmental or behavioral. He placed a copy of the scans on the table and clicked a remote. The wall behind him lit up with the image of a pediatric brain scan. Labels showed intact optic pathways. Underneath, a log entry by Harmon dated just 2 weeks after Noah's birth. Then why the diagnosis? One of the younger board members asked. Because someone needed the trial to fail, Ethan said. Because there was a power struggle inside this company. And someone decided the easiest way to discredit me was to erase the one thing that proved the science worked. The screen shifted again, this time showing a time-stamped footage clip. Noah reaching for a toy, his eyes tracking its movement. Another clip, him holding a reflective disc, watching light play across the ceiling. The board was silent now. Where did you get this? Whitmore asked coldly. From the woman who's been taking care of him. The only person who saw what the rest of us ignored. Grace Harding. She uncovered everything I buried. Everything you buried. Ethan let the words hang. She also found Emily's journal, he added quietly. Several heads lifted at that. The name of Ethan's late wife still carried weight. She recorded every conversation, every doubt, every warning. She asked me to stop. I didn't. And now she's gone. But what's worse is that we've been pretending our son is something he's not to protect a lie. Whitmore leaned forward. This is emotional, not scientific. You're framing guilt as evidence. This won't hold up. That's why Dr. Harmon is here, Ethan replied. He pressed the intercom button. Moments later, the glass door opened and Dr. Harmon stepped in. The room reacted, some with visible shock, others with immediate discomfort. Harmon walked to the table, placed a thick folder down, and spoke with steady authority. I was the overseeing neurologist on the Halcyon trial. I was removed after raising concerns about data manipulation. I stayed silent because I was warned to, but I've kept every file, every report, every email. He tapped the folder. This is a full account of what happened during the final 6 months of the project, including my assessment that the fire was an intentional act to destroy the research. Subject NC showed signs of sight from the first developmental stage. The blindness diagnosis was manufactured post-incident. Whitmore stood now, arms braced against the table. You're accusing this board of conspiracy. I'm stating the facts, Harmon said calmly. You're forgetting your NDA. I've filed whistleblower protection under federal statute, Harmon replied. This isn't a corporate dispute anymore. This is medical fraud and child endangerment. For the first time, Whitmore looked unsettled. Ethan stepped forward. I'm stepping down as CEO, he said, effective immediately. More murmurs now. Grace's breath caught. But I'm not leaving, he continued. I'm appointing an interim ethics committee. Clara will head it, and all Halcyon-related research will be audited externally. We are opening our records to federal review. If this company is going to survive, it won't be because we covered the truth. It'll be because we exposed it. Whitmore's voice was icy. You just destroyed everything you built. Ethan met his gaze. No, I'm finally making it worth something. The meeting ended not with applause, but with silence. A silence filled with consequence. As the board filed out, some furious, others stunned, Clara stepped into the room, followed by Grace. Noah's journal now sat in the center of the table, its worn pages like a quiet testament. Ethan looked at Grace. Thank you, he said. You're not done yet, she replied. He nodded. Later that day, the first subpoenas were filed. An internal memo circulated announcing the launch of the ethics committee. Clara met with the legal team. Harmon began preparing his deposition, and Grace returned to the nursery, where Noah was playing with the plush bear she thought was lost. He looked up as she entered. For a moment, his eyes found hers, sharp, bright, and unmistakably aware. He smiled, and for the first time, she smiled back, not with hope, but with certainty. He could see, and now the world would see him too. The legal storm had only just begun. Though Ethan's resignation from the CEO position had rattled Callaway Labs, it was far from the end. In fact, Grace could feel the danger building rather than fading. Within the mansion, security had shifted. New faces appeared, silent, sharp-eyed men dressed in gray suits with no-name badges and earpieces. Ethan insisted they were part of the transition team, overseeing sensitive documents and monitoring any potential backlash from the board. But Grace noticed things. Locks changed overnight, the server room sealed, even staff schedules suddenly revised. Despite it all, Noah was improving. With Harmon discreetly returning to consult under protection, a new pediatric specialist had been brought in, Dr. Alexis Monroe, a developmental optometrist from Boston who had worked with children recovering from cortical visual neglect. She arrived at the estate quietly, late one Thursday evening, and conducted her first evaluation in the privacy of the nursery, with only Grace and Ethan present. Noah, she said softly, kneeling on the playmat in front of him, can you find the red ball? She didn't point. She didn't prompt him with sound. She simply placed 3 colored balls before him, spaced out, one clearly red. Noah blinked slowly, then turned his head. His hands reached forward, hesitated, and then he picked the red one. Ethan didn't speak. He sat in the corner, still as stone, watching the impossible become fact. Dr. Monroe smiled faintly, recording a note in her file. Try this one, she said. placing a light board in front of Noah, the kind used in therapy for training visual attention. As she activated a small flickering, Noah's eyes followed it. Followed, not vaguely, not erratically, with focus. His visual pathways are functional, Monroe said after the session ended. There's no question now. The years of inactivity likely caused his brain to compensate through other sensory channels, but the potential has always been there. He sees. He just wasn't allowed to. Not allowed. Ethan asked quietly. Dr. Monroe gave him a knowing look. Children mirror the expectations of the environment around them. If he was raised to believe he was blind, if his caregivers treated him as blind, his brain would have adapted to that limitation. But he's adapting back now. He's coming out of it. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands, his voice raw. What happens next? We keep working, carefully, slowly, and safely. That night, Grace tucked Noah into bed with a softness she hadn't felt since her first week in the house. The boy looked up at her, really looked, and reached out, touching her hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I promise." But that promise would not hold for long. Just after 2 a.m, the mansion's main power grid flickered. The lights dimmed, security systems paused, and the automated locks on several doors temporarily failed. Most of the staff were asleep. Grace, however, jolted awake in her cot. She had been sleeping lighter since the board meeting. Her instincts sharpened to danger. Within seconds, the emergency lights blinked on, a soft blue glow washing over the halls. Grace grabbed her phone and stepped into the corridor. The house was eerily silent. Then she heard it, a thud, from the direction of the nursery. She ran. As she turned the corner, she saw the nursery door open, not wide, but just enough. The hallway camera that usually blinked green was dead. The internal server must have been compromised. Heart hammering, Grace stepped through the door. Noah's crib was empty. The blankets had been pulled back. A small lamp had been knocked over. The plush bear lay face down on the floor. "Noah!" Grace called, her voice trembling. From behind the play shelf came a sound, a soft whimper. She crossed the room and found him crouched beneath the window ledge, eyes wide, arms wrapped around his knees. "It's okay," she whispered, kneeling. "It's me." Noah didn't speak, but he reached for her and clung to her neck. She checked the crib again. No broken glass, no blood, nothing taken. But the security camera in the corner, her replacement after the last one had been destroyed, was missing, not broken, removed. The screws had been neatly undone, the wires clipped. Someone had entered, someone who knew exactly what to look for. She pressed the panic button on her phone. Within a minute, Lillian and Ethan appeared at the door, both pale and breathless. "What happened?" Ethan asked. Grace handed Noah to Lillian and motioned toward the wall. "The camera is gone. The server's down. Someone tried to get in here." "Security sweep now." Ethan barked, grabbing his phone. "Get everyone up." Within the hour, the house was swarming with the private security firm Ethan had contracted during the board transition. Grace stood near the nursery, arms folded, watching each room be searched. The intruder was never found. No doors forced. No alarms triggered. But the implication was clear. This wasn't a random break-in. It was a message. Someone didn't want Noah's progress recorded. Someone didn't want proof that the child could see. Later that morning, after Noah was safely relocated to Ethan's private suite under direct supervision, Grace and Clara met in the study. Harmon joined them via secure video call. This wasn't just about erasing evidence, Harmon said. It was intimidation. The timing, the precision. They knew where the cameras were. They knew how to cut the power and bypass the locks. "Someone inside?" Clara asked. Grace nodded. "It has to be a tech with high clearance. Or someone from the board still trying to protect what's left of the cover-up. Are we safe?" Clara asked. "No," Grace said simply. "Not yet." That evening, Ethan met with a federal investigator who had been quietly brought in through a contact at the Department of Health and Human Services. With Harmon's whistleblower status secured, the groundwork for a broader investigation had begun, but it would take time. In the meantime, Grace returned to the nursery to clean up what had been left behind. She picked up the fallen bear, placed a lamp back on the shelf, and paused as she reached for the sensory board. Carved into the back of the wooden frame, so faint it was barely noticeable, was a symbol. 3 slashes. Vertical. Sharp. Not part of any toy. Not for manufacturing. A mark. A calling card. Grace stared at it, chilled. She wasn't just fighting for Noah's vision anymore. She was fighting against people who had built a system on silence, and who would do anything to keep it that way. The following days moved with the quiet intensity of a countdown. Though the estate remained under heavy surveillance after the break-in, the fear had not left the air. It had simply changed form. Grace no longer looked over her shoulder out of paranoia. Now she did it out of calculation. Every movement had meaning. Every silence suggested presence. The message carved into the sensory board, 3 vertical slashes, had not been random. Clara confirmed it during a hushed conversation over encrypted messages. It was a mark used by the group that had attempted to seize control of the Halcyon project before it was shut down. "This is bigger than we thought," Clara told her. "It's not just about the board. It's a network. Private investors, corporate interests. People who saw Halcyon as a tool, not a cure. And they weren't done fighting. Still, progress pushed forward. Harmon was now living off-site under protection provided by federal authorities. His statements had been submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services, and a case had officially been opened under a sealed investigation. The research files, Emily's journal, and the recorded evidence of Noah's developing visual response had been packaged and submitted through legal channels. A full audit of Callaway Labs had begun, though Ethan remained sidelined from decision-making until the ethics review concluded. But the most critical progress was happening not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the quiet spaces between the walls of the estate. Inside Noah's new therapy suite, Dr. Monroe returned every other day. Grace attended every session, her presence now requested by Ethan himself. Monroe's exercises focused on controlled stimuli, lights, shapes, faces. Noah's reactions were cautious, but growing sharper. He started identifying people by their outline, then their clothing, and eventually by facial expression. "He knows you," Monroe told Grace one morning as Noah reached for her without sound. Not by voice, by sight. The statement made something inside her tremble. "He's going to remember everything, isn't he?" Grace asked. Monroe nodded. "Children always do, even if they can't name it. They carry it." It was a reminder of how far the damage reached, but also how much could still be reclaimed. That afternoon, as Ethan prepared for a virtual meeting with legal counsel, Grace joined him briefly in the office. He looked older than before, the weight of his choices etched deep into the lines around his eyes. But there was a clarity in his posture now, a man no longer hiding, but facing what had been done. "Clara says we'll have a court date in less than 2 weeks, he said. "The whistleblower protection has held so far, and the federal subpoenas are moving forward. The board is collapsing in on itself." Grace nodded. "They'll try to pivot, paint you as the rogue, say the science was dangerous." "They already have," he said. "A memo leaked this morning. Internal spin. Says Halcyon was flawed from the beginning, that I manipulated the team into continuing a project with no merit." "And Emily?" Grace asked. He went still. "She's not mentioned. They're pretending she was never part of it." Grace lowered her voice. "They erased her once. We're not letting them do it again." Later that night, Clara arrived with sealed documentation from the legal team. Inside were affidavits from 2 former lab technicians who had worked during the Halcyon project's final phase. Both had left the company within days of the data wipe following the fire. Both claimed they had been paid under the table to remain silent, and threatened when they refused to sign secondary NDAs. "They were scared," Clara said, placing the documents in Ethan's hands. "But now they've come forward. We're not alone in this." Grace stepped forward, placing another file on top of the pile. "This one's from me. A full report of Noah's responses. Every moment I witnessed. The nights, the toys, the reactions, all of it." Ethan looked at her. "You've done more than anyone else ever did for him," he said. "I just saw what others didn't want to," she said quietly. No, he replied. You chose to see. Just before midnight, Grace was in the hallway when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Harmon. Specialist located. Top of the field. We'll examine Noah in person. Appointment secured for next Tuesday. You'll need to bring him off-site. Secure transport required. She showed Ethan. He paused, then looked toward the nursery. We're almost there, he said, but this will be the final test. If the specialist confirms it, it's no longer a theory. It's proof, Grace said. Real clinical confirmation. Ethan contacted his legal team. Clara contacted the investigator. Transport was arranged in an unmarked van with 2 off-duty officers assigned to accompany the trip. Lillian packed Noah's things with the care of someone sending a child into battle. On the morning of the appointment, the estate was still and heavily guarded. Grace held Noah close, the boy wide-eyed but calm as he clutched his bear. He wore new clothes, soft textures, with patches covering the small scars on his arms from old medical tests. As the van pulled out of the estate, Grace watched through the tinted window as the gates closed behind them. The specialist clinic was located in a discreet medical building outside of town. No signage, no waiting room. Just a single suite, heavily protected, operated under the name of a research foundation that existed mostly on paper. Harmon greeted them in the hallway, his hand shaking slightly as he ushered them inside. This is Dr. Helena Yu, he said. She's a leading expert in pediatric cortical suppression. If anyone can assess Noah's vision accurately, it's her. Doctor, you didn't speak much. She observed, measured, used nonverbal cues. Her methods were efficient, quiet, precise. Over the next 40 minutes, she guided Noah through a series of interactive tests. Light tracking, object recognition, reflexive motion, facial response. Then she looked up. He has functional sight, she said. He's adapted to use it in a limited way. But the ability is there. The condition is not anatomical. It's behavioral, psychological. Learned. Someone taught him not to see. The room fell silent. Can it be reversed? Grace asked. With therapy and time, you replied. The neuroplasticity window is still open. He can relearn how to use his vision fully. Ethan leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Then it's true, he whispered. Everything we were told, every report, it was all a lie. Doctor, you handed over her findings, signed and sealed. I'll testify if needed, she said. This boy is not blind. He never was. As they drove back to the estate, Grace sat with Noah in the back seat. He looked up at her, then reached for her face, gently touching her chin. She smiled. You did it, she whispered. You made them see. But she knew the battle wasn't over. The truth was no longer a secret, but someone still wanted it buried. And they wouldn't stop until the last light was extinguished. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent, as the final day of hearings began. It had taken months of mounting evidence, sealed testimony, and legal battles to bring Callaway Labs before the Federal Ethics Tribunal. But now, with Dr. Harmon's deposition on record, Dr. Yu's expert assessment confirmed, and Emily's journal admitted into evidence, there was no more room for evasion. The lie had unraveled completely. Ethan sat at the front of the courtroom beside his legal counsel, not as a defendant, but as a key witness, no longer the untouchable CEO of a billion-dollar company, but a man stripped of power, facing the full weight of his past. Grace watched from the gallery, hands resting calmly in her lap, her gaze steady. Beside her sat Clara, silent and resolute. Noah wasn't present. Lillian had taken him out of town for the week, tucked safely into a quiet cabin on the coast where he could rest and play, far from the noise of the truth unfolding in court. Dr. Monroe visited him daily. The boy, no longer hidden in the shadows of blindness, had begun to bloom in small, beautiful ways, reaching confidently for objects across the room, laughing more freely, exploring colors with cautious wonder. His world had changed, and it was only just beginning. Back in court, the final testimony was underway. Dr. Yu stood before the tribunal, holding the full medical report in her hands. Noah Callaway is not blind, she said clearly. While he was once believed to suffer from optic nerve hypoplasia, Our examinations show no anatomical defect. His symptoms were the result of learned visual suppression, likely caused by environmental conditions and reinforced behaviors. One of the tribunal judges leaned forward. Are you saying the child was raised to believe he cannot see? Yes. Doctor, you said. And all developmental patterns confirm that his environment discouraged visual response from an early age. He was trained, consciously or not, to behave as if blind. The room held its breath. And now, he is regaining full use of his visual faculties. The process is slow, but the prognosis is hopeful. He will recover. Ethan bowed his head. Later, as the court recessed for deliberation, Ethan walked out into the corridor and found Grace standing at the far end, watching to the tall windows as clouds rolled over the courthouse. He stopped behind her. They'll rule in our favor, he said. I know they will. I know it too, Grace said, not turning. Still, Ethan said after a pause, it doesn't change what I did. Grace finally looked at him. No, it doesn't, but it changes what you do next. He met her eyes. I've resigned from the board completely. Clara will oversee the full restructuring. Harmon's work will be reinstated under federal supervision. And I've created a trust for children with developmental diagnoses that were mishandled due to corporate interference. Grace nodded slowly. That's a start. Ethan looked down. You saved him. Not me. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to, she said. You just need to be his father now. They returned to the courtroom. The tribunal reconvened. It took less than 20 minutes for the judges to deliver their conclusion. The findings declare that Project Halcyon was manipulated for corporate sabotage, its results concealed, and patient data falsified. The court sanctioned multiple board members for professional misconduct and recommended federal criminal investigations into several private investors linked to the sabotage. But a ruling that mattered most was this. Subject NC, Noah Calloway, was never medically blind. His misdiagnosis was not an error. It was a crime. The ruling granted full guardianship of Noah to Ethan, pending therapeutic oversight, and approved the transfer of all proprietary Halcyon research to an independent medical review body. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for comment. Ethan offered only one sentence before leaving. My son can see, and from now on I will too. That evening, back at the estate, the house felt different, lighter, not just in tone but in substance. The walls no longer echoed with cold precision. They carried sound now. Noah's laughter, the soft cadence of Grace's footsteps, the rustle of new wind through open windows. Ethan walked to the nursery, now converted into a development suite. Toys designed for sensory limitation have been replaced with learning tools. Color boards, visual puzzles, books with bright pictures. A large window had been uncovered, letting in the first natural light the room had known in over 2 years. Noah stood by the window, his bear in one hand, the other resting on the glass. Grace entered behind him. Do you know what he said this morning? She asked. Ethan shook his head. He said, the sky is big. He just stood there, staring up at it, and said those words like he'd been waiting his whole life to say them. Ethan smiled faintly. Noah turned then, seeing them both, and ran toward Grace with open arms. She caught him easily, lifting him into her arms. His face was brighter, more expressive. His eyes, those blue eyes once thought sightless, were full of life and light. Gracie, he said clearly. It was the first time he'd called her by name. Ethan watched. Emotion caught his throat. I want him to know you'll always be here, he said. If you want that. Grace looked down at the boy in her arms, then back at the man who had once lived in denial but now stood open and raw before her. I'll stay, she said, as long as he needs me. They walked together into the courtyard, where the late afternoon sun was beginning to break through the clouds. The boy who had once been hidden now saw the world. The man who had once refused to feel now held nothing back. In the end, it was not science that saved them. It was truth. It was love. It was the courage to see, and the strength to let go of the dark. Noah laughed again, and this time it echoed all the way to the Calloway estate, not as a sound lost in silence, but as a song that had finally found its way home.